So I've done a survey of sorts of roughly 20 novel structure paradigms. I posted a bibliography on my blog, but I wanted to piece together an aggregate structure here, putting together the most common plot points I came across in my research. I've always been somewhat of a structure skeptic because I don't like the notion that art be formulaic at all. And certainly some of the structures I came across are very formulaic, stating specific page numbers or specific percents for certain plot points that you need in your story. I hate that crap. But we can all agree on what is the most common assertion I saw in this research, which is that your story needs a beginning, a middle, and an ending. It's so obvious as to be completely useless advice, but can we go any further than that? Are there other universal aspects to story structure? Here's what I found. In the beginning, which you could call Act 1, there are three-ish things you want to include. The first is stasis/hook. This goes by several different names, but the concept here is twofold. One, you want to show us the world of the story pre-shift, pre-transformation, pre-irreversible change. This is all predicated on the assertion that story is about a transformation. That transformation does not need to occur within your main character. It may occur within the world of the main character or the circumstances. But by the story's ending, things are different than they were at the beginning. That's all this is about. Stasis, also known as ordinary world, is essential. But it's also highly recommended that you hook the reader. And so you'll want a source of tension right away, not the novel-wide conflict necessarily. A lot of stories opt for a prologue, which is a handy way to work in conflict, especially if the ordinary world/stasis of your main character is not super exciting. Dan Wells calls this the Ice Monster Prologue, which is a reference to Game of Thrones, the first book in the Song of Ice and Fire series, which features a suspenseful scene north of the wall involving an ice monster. The Matrix is another famous example. Neo's life is pretty boring, so the film opens with Trinity's running from the agents. Star Wars also has a prologue with Darth Vader boarding the rebel ship. This is not to say that you need a prologue by any means. In fact, there's no doubt that prologues are a bit overdone among novice novelists. But you do need a hook. Next is the inciting incident. This is also known as the call to adventure or the disturbance. That's what James Scott Bell calls it. It's just something that shakes up the status quo for the main character. K.M. Weiland says, it's the moment the normal world is first significantly rocked by conflict. Quick aside, in a novel, you want readers to see the inciting incident. In a short story, the inciting incident may have occurred before the story we read on the page. But regardless, the concept doesn't change here. The inciting incident is what upsets the equilibrium of the character's world. And then finally in Act 1, you want a threshold, a door. This is a point of no return. Once through this door, the main character cannot go back. That's not how an inciting incident works, by the way. After the inciting incident, there's a chance things could go back to normal. But this point, sometimes called plot point number 1, doorway number 1, the threshold, is an irreversible crossing. Think Neo taking the red pill in the Matrix. Now, when I taught this class a couple weeks ago, a question came up. Does this threshold crossing need to be a single event? K.M. Weiland has a good article about a key event versus plot point number 1, in which she discusses that these two events are two distinct and important sides of the same coin. The key event, she argues, is about leaving the normal world, which, she says, is often a physical departure from a physical setting, but can also be leaving a previously held mindset or a complacent set of expectations. Plot point number 1, she says, is about entering the new world, which is just to say that your doorway number 1 may indeed spread over a few scenes. In The Matrix, Neo takes the pill and steps out of the normal world, which for him is the Matrix, but the crossing isn't done yet, because the next scene, he wakes up in his pod and is birthed into the actual world. So there's at least 2 scenes there. You don't need that. You could have it all happen in one sentence, but the answer to the question is yes, the crossing could span multiple scenes and pages. So in the interest of keeping this simple, Act 1 is about hooking us, showing us the pre-transformation world and/or character, showing us a disturbance, and then pushing your main character through a threshold. All of that stuff is pretty universal across all these novel structure paradigms. There's a fair amount of agreement, too, about the final act of the story. Door 2, crisis, climax, resolution. That is, a second irreversible threshold, a decision, acting on that decision, and then the final state of the character or world. James Scott Bell says that the minimal structural components of a story are a disturbance and 2 doors. If door number 1 was the initial threshold into a new world, door number 2 is the one that makes the final battle or climax inevitable. You see some variation in the paradigms, and indeed in stories themselves, regarding an event that occurs in proximity to this one, the all is lost moment or apparent defeat. Some have it preceding this door number 2 and make door number 2 more of a revelation. Some have it being door number 2. Some have it occurring after door number 2 and spurring the crisis and climax. We could add apparent defeat or major setback to the list, but you have a lot of flexibility as to where it goes or whether it's separate from these other points. But it's a common story point, so I just want to throw that out there. Door number 2 ushers the character into another inevitability. With her new, and you could say now complete, understanding of the problem, the character moves toward the final battle. The crisis is a decision moment. The character must choose between what he wants and what he needs, as K.M. Weiland says, or between the lie and the truth. You can also think of this as being a true dilemma between irreconcilable goods or between two bad options. In any of these cases, though, this choice will do a lot to reveal true character and to usher in the climax, which is the next point. I don't think I need to say much about the climax or final battle. There is absolute and total universal agreement that a story has a climax. And resolution is also pretty much unanimous. Resolution just equals the shift state. The character transformed, living in a world transformed. That is character or world. One of those has to be transformed, not both. You could have both, but at least one of those has to be transformed. Now let's back up to the middle of the story. The only truly agreed upon point in this large section of the story is the midpoint. At the midpoint, the hero can no longer afford to just react. She must face down the conflict or give up the goal. K.M. Weiland points out that this is a moment of truth when the main character realizes the central truth about the nature of the conflict. And indeed, it's very common to see structural paradigms say that before the midpoint, the main character reacts, and after the midpoint, the main character acts. Reaction versus action comes up a lot in these paradigms. But I really like Alan Palmer's conceptualization of the midpoint. He says someone, generally the antagonist, should hold up a mirror to the hero and make them aware of their flaw, typically in none too subtle terms. In doing this, it should be clear that the hero cannot continue towards their goal without addressing this flaw. Palmer thus pushes for a midpoint that is geared toward the resolution. The plot is not the end, he says, it's just the means. The end is transformation of your hero, and the midpoint is the fulcrum for that transformation. I have been guilty of being almost entirely ignorant of the existence of midpoints in literature and film. And then I started looking. I looked at a few off-cited films and found that right around the halfway point, within minutes of it usually, there was a pretty clear midpoint. And I picked up a few books, including Lincoln and the Bardo, which is a crazy mess of a novel that appears to be completely and totally unconventional. It eschews normal narration. It's about Lincoln, yes, but the main characters are really just a couple of dead guys. And yet, there it is. It's on roughly page 171 in my version of the novel. I won't spoil it for you, but here's a little hint. I saw, as if for the first time, the great beauty of things of this world. Water drops in the woods around us, plopped from leaf to ground, etc. You can kind of look that up. And indeed, just a few pages later, there is a part division, and we go from part 1 to part 2. Okay, so there's the basic structure. Now, there's not much agreement on what the rest of the middle looks like, but flesh it out with complications and revelations. A good rule of thumb is 2 to 6 major complications before the midpoint and 2 to 6 major complications after the midpoint. Sprinkle in some revelations. Revelations are big reveals that change the character's understanding of the nature of the problem. John Truby points out the big revelations in Alien, the first series. Here they are. Revelation number 1, the crew realizes that the alien is using the air vents to move through their ship. Revelation 2, Ripley learns from the computer mother that the crew is expendable in the name of science. Revelation 3, Ripley discovers that Ash is a robot that will kill her if necessary to protect the alien. Revelation 4, after his robot head is revived, Ash tells Ripley that the alien is a perfect organism, an amoral killing machine. Revelation 5, Ripley discovers that the alien has cut her off from the shuttle pod. And Revelation 6, Ripley discovers that the alien is hiding on the ship. Note that these are game-changing revelations, and that's the point. Okay, so here is the aggregate. Hook, stasis, inciting incident, door number 1. 2 to 6 major complications before the midpoint, and then 2 to 6 major complications afterwards. Revelations sprinkled throughout the middle of the story. Door number 2, crisis, climax, resolution. I like this. It's not overly prescriptive, but it recognizes that there are some universals to story structure. That said, I am no novel structure guru. This is just my comparative analysis of lots of them. Be sure to check out my compendium of novel structure resources for more information on my sources and perhaps to find yourself a more detailed aid in managing your novel structure. You may not be an outliner, and that's fine, but I think novel structure can be helpful even if you're just using it after your first draft. The whole concept here is just about having weight-bearing pillars to hold up the long-form story. Here's an analogy. There's a grocery store nearby, just about a half mile from my house, and there's an underground parking lot below it. It's free, so I always park there. But I hate it because there are these enormous pillars every 2 parking spaces, so you're guaranteed to have to navigate around these things. And our only car is a stupid minivan, which makes parking in this tight underground lot very tricky and claustrophobia inducing. And yet, I see why those pillars are necessary. You've got a long structure that is bearing a lot of weight. When you're telling a long form story, you don't want it to come crashing down on the reader, which is to say, you don't want the reader to lose interest or engagement. And the key to engagement is all about that anticipated transformation that will occur within the story. The various plot points along the way just ensure that there is movement toward that final shift state. Okay? Thanks for watching. I hope that helps introduce you to novel structure. I have some links below. Good luck and keep writing.